Welcome to We Don't Have Cookies. I'm your host, Jason Marshall. On today's episode, I'm going to be spotlighting some of the segment contributors to the show. Joining me right off the bat is the person behind the Fake Advice for New Comics segment on the podcast and the host of the Comedy A Go-Go podcast, Dave Nelson.
Thank you for having me on, Jason.
Great to have you, man. I'm not sure exactly when this is coming out, but if anybody wants to check it out, I was on your podcast, Comedy A Go-Go, so I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I think it was a lot of fun, man. Appreciate you having me on yours. How long have you been doing stand-up, and what got you into it?
As a wise veteran comedian once told me, just say you're new to it, so then anything you do is gonna look awesome. At first, you're like, what? And then I gotta let you take it back up before I explain that point. Is as you go along, particularly when you start out as an open micer, senior veteran comedians, however you want to, anybody that's been doing long, you seem senior, but touring comics will say something and it's short, it's poignant, and you're pissed off when you hear it because, for example, a veteran comic who's got credit said, I asked, well, what's some advice? He said, be funny. Every year that statement becomes more poignant and makes more sense. As for when I first heard it, I'm like, that doesn't do shit to help me out, but it makes sense as time progresses. So that's one of those pieces of advice, because I think people get stuck on time and service translates to I'm a good or funny comic. I imagine you've seen people who've been doing it 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and they're still probably they've reached a level where they're never going to get better. So I don't know, does that make somebody, does the longer you do it make you better? Not necessarily. Yeah,
I know exactly what you mean. I saw somebody, I'm not going to say any names here, but they were a feature act at a local comedy club, and they were touring with this particular person. So it wasn't like they were a local person. They're actually touring with the act. But I bought their DVD after the show. I took it home and I watched it. And they've been doing the same act since In Living Color was on television, which blew me away. And I wasn't really sure how to feel about it because on one hand, you haven't really updated anything since the 90s. But on the other hand, your material works and it's so good that you've kept using it since the 90s.
You see a lot of that in Florida. I live about 18 miles from the Florida border, so I just spend a lot of time over there. And there's comics, and it's hack. You get your 30 minutes, your 45 minutes, you get your hour set. What else do you need to do? And that's very old. They did that back in the vaudeville days too. But with the internet and technology, if you got yourself with a good group of people, you're not gonna allow that to happen yourself. But it does.
I was very surprised by that. Like I said, I wasn't really sure how to feel about it because it kind of goes two ways. And personally, I thought it was kind of shitty, but it's working for the guy.
I'd feel ripped off if I just saw your act and then I just paid for your act again. Because what if you really like that guy and you go back and he does the same act next time? You can get him once, maybe twice. The third time you've run your course. And are you really looking to move up from feature to headliner? Or maybe that person's just comfortable. Who knows?
That's the way it kind of seemed. Very nice person, and that was the part that upset me the most about it was I get home and I'm thinking, man, this has so much content on here. I can't wait to see what he used to do. And I watch it and I'm like, oh, it's the exact same thing I just watched live on stage, and I paid $20 to watch it again.
You'll never have to go back.
No, but I did get a picture with him, so I guess that's part of the $20. I don't know.
Oh, well, you paid his gas bill that week.
So what was one of your worst moments on stage?
I got a guest spot at a big name chain comedy club. It's an old opera house, and the acoustics are phenomenal in that. So where when you're on stage, you can hear what people are saying in the back of the comedy clubs because it's doing that weird angle stuff and whatnot. I could hear people going, man, this guy's not doing very good. I feel sorry for him. I was still in that young open micer, maybe 2 years into it. And it was a good ego checker because sometimes I think you get a little bit big for your britches.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm getting a spot. Oh, these things are going well. It's like, oh, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. So it pushed me back to the grind. I don't know if it was terrible. It was a humbling experience. It was a good eye-opening experience. I think any experience, whether you view it good or bad, it depends on what are you going to take from it. I guess that's a bit up with people, kind of like everything's positive, but stand up, there's so much negative to it. You sometimes got to take that and flip that to a positive.
And that'll do it to you. Just a small comment like that. I was talking to a guy a few years ago. He was doing a show. Somebody stood up and just said, "Who cares?" And that got into his head. After the show, he kept thinking, yeah, who does care about any of the shit I have to say? And he quit for years before he got back on stage. And it doesn't have to be somebody throwing a beer bottle at you or some big brawl or anything like that. It can be just a small comment, and that can be your very worst moment ever. I don't think a lot of people realize that.
I'm an A-type personality and competitive. So my thing to take that is turn that into a fuck you, I'm going to prove you wrong moment.
Mm-hmm.
You hear a lot about the comics that are like, why did this? I mean, I feel like I'm in competition with myself, and I set the bar depending on my situation, where I'm at, my expectations of what I want to do. And, you can let it get in your head and be a hang up. I mean, the internet's a great place. Be able to go read, I'm sure I could go find shitty comments about my podcast and be like, well, why am I doing it? Well, if you're such a badass, why don't you do your own podcast and get the guest list that I've got and the reputation that I've been able to build over time. And nothing's perfect. You always want to strive, and I'm sure you're always trying to work to make your podcast better.
That's one thing I try to do with my show is I'm not competing with anybody else. For one, this is all time shifted. Anybody can listen at any time they want. It's just competing with yourself and trying to make it better. And I think if you focus on trying to compete with other people, you're just hurting yourself because you're not making yourself better. You're just making yourself better than that person.
And then you're playing also the what if game. And why did they get it and I didn't? I think about where I live is in southeast Georgia. I know there are people in Atlanta and probably Orlando and certain other bigger cities that get more opportunities and chances to do things that I won't. And that's just because they're geographically located where shit's happening. And so, I could be mad. It's like, why does Comic X get this? Good for them, man. I wasn't there to get it. So why am I going to get butthurt? Well, then if I want it, then I need to move there or, be able to put myself in that position, which I can't at this moment.
And a lot of times it's just putting yourself out there, because I felt that way with something. It was a few years ago. And I thought, well, why did this happen to this person? And the fact of the matter was, all I had to do was ask, and it happened to me, and not just happened to me, but multiple times, because before that, I never even thought of it,
Yeah. And if you do that what if thing, so somebody gets something and maybe you want, maybe that you're not right for it as well. We talked about a little bit about booking shows. You've got to put certain people together.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe you're just not the right person for it. And if you go and it becomes like a shit show or just a terrible nightmare, sometimes your dream become your nightmare, however that cliche phrase goes. So you get what you wish for, however that is.
Yeah. Well, I found you on Twitter after I saw you using the fake advice for new comics hashtag. I thought it was so funny that I wanted to have that as a segment on the show. I looked into you a little more, found out you had a podcast, which that segment was also featured on. And I really like listening to your show. How did you get into podcasting, and how long have you been doing it?
I've been doing podcasting a little less time than I've been doing stand-up. And when I started doing it was about the time the Nerdist started and Mark Maron started. It was kind of very punk rockian. Chris Hardest this is before he kind of blew up and became who he was, his second renaissance, so to speak, in his career. What I liked about it is you can do a podcast. You don't have to, it doesn't take a lot of money, and you don't have to be technologically super savvy. And I'm a college professor, and so I get access to certain things. I can have access to certain technologies that kind of got me in the window. Or if I had questions, I could go talk to the people in the mass media, and they're more than happy to share that information. And I thought this would be a good way. My podcast used to be about an hour to an hour and a half where I would just interview comics and ask them questions. And it was kind of like my high school or my college on what are things I wanted to know or what were things I was working on. So if that week I was like, well, what's the key of writing a good tag? That's where my questions would center around. Or how do you work on your stage presence? What's your writing thing? And it gets to a point where you kind of figure out your own way. And the podcast has morphed. Within the last 2 years, why do I do this? I mean, I work a full-time job, and sometimes even if you're doing it part-time, it become another full-time job on top of that with life and everything else that goes with it. And I'm in Valdosta. Industry is not knocking down my door, nor is it in the neighborhood. But I took the year and just kind of made it like a vlog, an audio vlog of like, why do I do stand-up? What do I really enjoy about it? And I toured, did some tours and some one-night stuff, and to determine really, did I want to continue to do with it? And I have a passion for it and a love for it. And so this year, instead of like going, am I going to quit stand-up? After a year, I did a year of it, and boom. So now it's like, it's changed to what's my passion behind stand-up. So this year is that thing. And it's kind of on as I started out now, it's an existential quest to understand my passion and others for stand-up comedy.
I like that.
I think with anything, it morphs over time, and it went from a question answer to like, okay, here's an open source tutorial, for better lack of a term, masterclass on something that could help out other young open micers. And then as I got more experience, I kind of like, okay, what do I want my audience to be? So I kind of drive what I do to kind of hopefully be helpful tool for people just starting out, maybe people 2-3 years into open mic, because you're still making those kind of dumb mistakes and things to think about. And because my podcast has been a really great tool for me networking, which I know the N word is a terrible word to say. It's super businessy, but I get to virtually meet people like you, Jason, and then hopefully someday I'll be like, hey, I'm going to be in Ohio. Can you help me out with the show? And we'll get to hang out and, have a beer if you drink or something along that line, and go have dinner or something like that. I mean, I got friends all over the country now, and that's the beauty of it that I wouldn't have had otherwise by just going to my mics or doing my one-nighters in the Midwest and down in the South.
That's another thing about podcasting is it takes you out of the area that you're used to. And I know a lot of people, for whatever reason, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it seems like they just try to focus on just what's going on in their area. And a lot of times, man, if you just branch out, there's so much more out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a Would You Rather scenario from our friends over at the This or That podcast. I'll have a link to their podcast and to their Twitter handle in the show notes, so people go there and you can check them out. The scenario is, would you rather have the body of an 80-year-old or the brain of a 12-year-old boy?
Oh, man. I would rather have the body of an 80-year-old, but let's say like an Arnold Schwarzenegger 80-year-old, because he's going to be pretty buff, because they didn't say I could caveat that at all on there. Because, man, the brain of a 12-year-old's a dipshit.
Yeah.
Like you're in that prepubescent, you're kind of like, it's that point where you're kind of into girls and you don't know why, and you have that perennial kind of hard on for some reason.
Yeah, it's the weird age where you still want to play with toys, but you feel like you're too old, so now you just want to go play sports instead. You're not really sure what to do.
Yeah. I'll go with the 80-year-old.
Yeah, that one was kind of tough for me. I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought, it would suck to have an 80-year-old body. No offense to anybody out there, but like you said, there is that caveat. It doesn't say that you couldn't have taken care of yourself really well for the last 80 years.
It's almost pejorative in like your special needs if you have the mind of a 12-year-old.
Well, before we go, I heard you say on one of your episodes that you were part of the We Don't Have Cookies family, and I was really happy to hear you use that term family, because that's how I want people to feel that are a part of this show. And I want to thank you for coming on board, man. It's been great, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I have enjoyed and I enjoy your podcast. Per the discussion we had the other day, it's like, it hadn't been on. You're like, I didn't know if I was on vacation, so I didn't take my computer with me, so you don't know 1 week podcasts are here, the next day they're gone. Yeah. You can look at the iTunes graveyard of podcasts. You go, that looks really cool. And then you see the last one was like May 2011 or 12. You're like, oh, I guess I won't subscribe to that.
I found a really cool show. It was over, I think it was in London. And it was Sunday Spit Roast is what it was called. These guys were so funny. And I started communicating back and forth with them. And I thought, man, I can't wait to get the next episode and to keep talking with these guys. And the episode that I started listening to just happened to be the very last thing they put out. It's just over. It was so disappointing. I love that show, and I only got to hear one episode.
Yes, that is the joy and the frustration of technology and just having everybody being able to blast out whatever they want.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. And I hope to have you on the regular episode sometime here soon.
Regular, irregular. I'm just happy that you blast out the fake advice for other people to be miseducated about comedy about.
You know the old saying, things happen for a reason? Well, I wasn't able to line up schedules with the other segment contributors, but I'm almost at capacity for my hosting storage for the month, which rarely ever happens. So I guess it's a good thing that I don't have a normal length show up today, because it'll give me plenty of storage to upload next week's 150th episode, which also happens to be the show's 2-year anniversary. So what better way to end the second year of the show than to put out an episode where things didn't go as planned, like the entire second year of this show. If you want to contact me, send me an email, jason@wedon'thavecookies.com, or call 929-266-9342 and leave a voicemail. All of that will be in the show notes. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, because you don't want to miss the anniversary episode that'll be out Monday. And make sure you tell your friends. That episode would be a good time to get somebody into the show. That's it for me, guys. I'll talk to you Monday.